Hello, I'm Dawn Durham.
Hi, and I'm Dr. Catherine Poggi.
Welcome to PaTTANpod. I want to assure all of you who are listening, PaTTANpod and the entire PaTTAN system remains dedicated to providing professional development to educators and support for families and students during these unprecedented times. Today, we're excited to welcome Dr. Jane Thierfeld Brown to help us out in understanding how to prepare students on the autism spectrum for college and career. Jane, thanks so much for being with Catherine and I today. We're excited to talk with you.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I think this is an important conversation to have in a normal situation, but in the current situation we're having, I think a lot of teachers and parents are asking these kinds of questions. So I want to jump right into asking and really getting your insight. What are the differences between high school and college for students on the autism spectrum? What differences should we be expecting to see?
I would think the most striking difference at any time, but especially during a time like this, where we're in these, as you so aptly said, unprecedented times, it's a much more independent nature in the college environment. And many college service providers right now are saying that since students have moved home during the pandemic, that they're falling back into their high school selves. And so it's even more striking to me, the differences and the very positive changes that students on the spectrum make when they move on to the college environment. The main difference being in a high school environment, most services are delivered to the student. So if a student requires some mandated IEP services, those have to be delivered either through a special ed resource teacher, through a speech pathologist, a counselor, many different people who can deliver those mandated services. The difference in college is that you must access the services. And of course, we don't have all of those different professionals who can do the intricacies of special education, because in college, there is no special education. The only special education that exists in college is if you're becoming a special education teacher and you're in those courses. The laws are very different, where IDEA is a federally mandated law of entitlement. And in college, the law we fall under is the ADA, which is a civil rights statute of eligibility. Totally different, and where K-12 or even high school, they work on a success model. You must find what works most aptly for each student, and the program has to fit the child. Once students move on to college, we work on an equal access model, so that the student needs to fit the program and the services that are offered by that institution. No college or university has to change their offerings based on a student. Those are the main differences about access. I'm sorry.
No, please. It sounds like at the high school level, services are available kind of almost automatically. You don't have to request those services. Whereas at the college level, you have to have the know-how to access the available services and how to require them or how to ask for them and how to obtain them. Is that correct?
It is. I mean, that's why we put as much emphasis as we do on self-advocacy. You must be able to self-advocate. And the law actually states that it has to be self-identification, not parent identification. The student has to identify and then present their documentation of their disability. And all of the accommodations that we make in colleges are based on documentation, not on an IEP meeting, not on recommendations that somebody makes. We look at those recommendations, but disability service providers who know their environment and their professors and how the classes are taught, they look at those recommendations and they look at testing and determine appropriate accommodations.
Mm-hmm. It's something certainly to think about, that self-advocacy piece, because that seems to be how a student on the autism spectrum, and I think any student who may have a need, is going to be able to access that. So I appreciate that conversation. Thanks for that.
It's a really important piece. And we try, as college professionals, we try and push high schools and families to recognize that and work on it during high school, because it really is the most important piece. Because people who don't ask for help don't get it. There's most college service providers have a caseload between 150 and 600. And this year I've met more and more service providers whose caseloads are around 700. So we can't reach out to people and say, do you need some assistance? We have to depend on the student coming to us saying, so here's what I need for this class. And that's a huge difference from high school, where it's usually either a parent or another high school professional, usually a teacher, saying, gee, Kim really needs this assistance in my class. Mm-hmm. And now it has to be the student, because there's no way anyone else would know.
So Jane, with all of these details and things that you're sharing, there sounds like there's so many steps. Are there any primary areas that families and schools can focus on to prepare our youth for college?
It's a great question. Number one, I'd say, is independence. It's so important that students have some independence, and you can develop that in very simple ways. Even things like, not during the pandemic, of course, but when we're not in this lockdown or stay at home mandate, even just staying in the car and giving your student a list, or sorry, your child, I'm used to college students, giving your child a list of 4 or 5 things to go into the grocery store with a debit card or cash and get them and come back out to the car. Even that kind of independence, many of our students have never done those kinds of things. Developing that type of independence is huge, because think about going to college. You go into the bookstore, you have to figure out which books you need. You have to figure out, what you need for your room, or laundry detergent, whatever it is. And that being the first time that you've done those kinds of things is really difficult. So we want students to practice all of those really good independence and independent living skills. Little things like calling and making your own appointment for a haircut, calling and making a doctor's appointment, those kinds of things that often it's easier for the parents to jump in and do instead. And I would really encourage families to, in high school during those years, back off some of those things and let the student develop those skills on their own. Along with that, being able to cook a few simple meals and knowing how to do laundry, really key. So all of those things, whether you're living on campus or living at home, those are some of those skills. So independence is key. The self-advocacy that Dawn and I just spoke about, really important. And to develop that skill while you're in that comfortable environment of high school, where people know you and they care about you and they've watched you grow up. Developing that self-advocacy is so much easier then to gain that confidence and to be able to then hopefully translate some of that to college. And then some social skills. Even for our students on the spectrum who are very socially anxious or really prefer not to interact socially, it's so crucial to develop a few of those skills and just know how to at least say hello, how to introduce yourself, how to ask questions like, gee, I missed class yesterday. Can I get a copy of your notes? I mean, what many of us consider a small interaction, it's so essential once you get to college to be able to have what we know as a social interaction, but to have comfort in that area can open up the world for someone who's on the spectrum. And just so that they don't create a lot of anxiety. And that brings me to the last bullet point, which is having some strategies to deal with the anxiety. We're seeing a lot of students on this, our numbers are growing wonderfully at colleges, and which is really not only encouraging, but it's encouraging some staff and faculty to disclose that they're on the spectrum. And what we really need is for students to have some strategies for how to deal with anxiety when that anxiety ramps up.
Excellent. I truly thank you. My thought was twofold: see what families and schools could do, and then what the youth could do. And your answer was so robust in looking at all facets. So thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you.
Jane, if I could jump in and ask, because of the current situation we're in, is there anything we could offer to families to help them support their student or their child that's on the autism spectrum, just kind of in general, with the work that may or may not be coming home, with the lack of routine that may have disappeared simply because we're trying to find our new normal space here? Could we offer any advice to how to support families during this time?
I think the best thing we can do to support families is provide some means of support. In other words, give them a platform for them to talk to other parents going through this and to talk to maybe some professionals. I know through PaTTAN, we did a virtual parent group last week. That was wonderful. And parents were asking each other questions about how things were going, and everyone had very different responses. I think the best thing to tell parents is we're in uncharted territory. As I said to one parent a couple nights ago, I wish I could reach over and look at my pandemic handbook and give you a good answer. None of us has one. None of us has a good outline for how to deal with these issues. So I think we all have to give ourselves and our children who are now home some space. None of us are quite sure how to deal with this. We need to encourage our students to create a space to work in. Just doing your homework at the kitchen table or on your bed where you did it in high school may not be enough right now. You may need to create a workspace that's similar to where you might have done your work in college. You need a schedule, and parents may need to help the student by imposing some type of schedule. Many college faculty, and this is totally dependent on college by college, but many college faculty are discouraged to have synchronous classes. In other words, if your class met Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9 o'clock, there are colleges that are saying, please let your students listen to the lecture as appropriate, because they may be taking care of ill relatives. They may be in a place where they can't get onto internet at 9 o'clock on those days. But there are colleges that are saying your schedule is your schedule. So ask what that is. If your student doesn't have a schedule, we know that schedule and predictability helps folks with autism tremendously. We really want those students to be able to, who have to come home, to follow whatever their high school is telling them. And if they have a predictable schedule, to follow it. If they don't, help impose some structure. I think the other thing that families can do is recognize the grieving period that students are going through. If they've developed some social skills and are really enjoying some of those friendships that they've developed at school, not being able to see people is really hard, and they might feel like they're regressing. The students may. I think the other thing that we need to be very cognizant of is when this is all over and we go back to whatever we considered normal, is the PTSD, the post-traumatic stress that we're going to see in a lot of us, in our colleagues, in our students, and to be able to deal with that. I think there's students who are going to need to develop trust again. And I usually quote Barry Prezant and Fields Myers here from their wonderful book, Uniquely Human, A Different Way of Seeing Autism, where talk about the opposite of anxiety is not calm, it's trust. And if I trust my environment and I trust that things are going to be the same, and if I trust the people I'm working with and learning from understand me, then I remain calm. But because of that, autism becomes a disability of trust. And I think that that really is what we need to encourage families to think about, that there has to be develop some trust with the student that what's happening is okay, and that we're going to get through this semester or the academic year, and that things are going to go back to some sort of normalcy at some point that we don't know, which is, it's difficult. It's difficult to create structure around the unknown.
I think these are valid points to make for all of us, right? Find a platform of your supports, of where you can go when you need a little bit of extra help, a little push, a space to work in, whether that be the students or the children in the home, or the adults in the home that now have to shift to potentially working out of the home. Keeping yourself on a schedule, thinking about the fact that structure will benefit us because we're so used to that in our normal day. Again, what we refer to as normal, our typical day prior to all of this happening. And I think that you're right. There is a little bit of a grieving process going on here. We have lost a little bit of autonomy. We have lost the ability to hang out with our colleagues and our friends and our classmates. And I think there is something to be said for that, I don't know that Catherine and I have had that conversation before, that there is certainly some grieving time. So Jane, I'm so glad that you were able to have that conversation with us and kind of guide us through thinking, what can we be doing to support our students on the autism spectrum? And I would say all students in preparing for college and career, but even more so because of the current situation, is how to really address those things here at home for our families. So I'm so appreciate your time and so grateful that you joined PaTTAnpod today with us. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you for having me.
On behalf of Catherine and I, we want to just say you teachers inspire all students, and even more so beyond in your classroom. So thank you so much for that. Thank you to John Ragsdale for producing this podcast, and we'll see you next time on PaTTAnpod. Stay safe, be well.